Hello everyone. So we have gathered the entire Storm Team 2 team to talk about our thoughts on our winter weather outlook for this upcoming season.
Yeah, we have a La Niña that we are looking at.
And many other global patterns that will also have an impact on our winter.
And a very warm Lake Erie will come into play once again.
No doubt. All right, we're going to get into all of that. But first, we're going to start with our forecast, zone by zone, for how much snow we think we're going to get this winter season. We'll start off in our Buffalo zone. So we expect snowfall here will be slightly below normal and temperatures trending a bit above normal. However, we once again may see some healthy snowfall events. So we're calling for 80 to 90 inches of snowfall for the entire winter season. The average is 94 inches.
For our northern zones, not surprisingly, the lowest totals. Look for snow totals in the 50 to 60 inch range.
Moving on to the south towns, snowfall totals near the lake shore is expected to be in the 70 to 90 inch range. However, inland and into the hills, 120 to 140 inches.
And heading south into the southern tier, we are looking at a larger range from 80 to 180 inches with those higher amounts over ski country.
So how did we get to this forecast? Here's a little bit as to the why.
Yeah, when meteorologists make season-long forecasts, there are a few naturally occurring climate variabilities that we need to take into consideration. The most well-known is the El Niño southern oscillation. It's projected to enter a negative phase, which is nicknamed La Niña. That means cooler than average sea surface temperatures in the Pacific near the equator, and that can alter the path of the jet stream. Now, for the Great Lakes region, we typically lean a little bit warmer and have a little bit more precipitation than normal during a La Niña. But again, that's just one of many climate factors we need to examine.
And you remember back in 2012, we had a weak to moderate La Niña, and of course, not a lot of snow that season. That's where we have to look at other weather patterns such as the NAO. The NAO stands for the North Atlantic Oscillation. This is where we look at the Icelandic low and the Azores high. When these pressures are stronger than average, we have a positive NAO, and it's a negative NAO when these pressures are weaker than average. When we have a negative NAO, that's when we can expect cold and wintry weather. However, this year we're expecting a more positive NAO, especially by January and February.
So La Niña weather patterns have become a lot more frequent in recent history. In fact, in the past 10 years, 5 years have featured a La Niña. However, going back 70 years, there have been 16 seasons with a weak La Niña like we're expecting. During those winter seasons, 8 have featured above normal snowfall, 5 below normal snowfall, and 3 years with average snowfall.
And Lake Erie always plays a factor, and the lake water continues to be very warm. And this year, even record-breaking once again for the first part of October, hitting 70 degrees for many days, and is again a large source of fuel for big lake effect snow events, potentially for the first part of winter especially. Even if we have melting in between events like last year, plan for some decent snow at times. Also, there is a continuing trend of Lake Erie not seeing as much ice cover. This chart shows the lake's ice cover is changing over time, with fewer years of the lake freezing over in recent decades, and that trend appears to be accelerating, which is likely a contributing factor to more frequent major lake effect snowstorms.
So that's a brief look at our winter weather forecast for the upcoming season. For a bigger and more detailed description as to the whys, let's head back to the studio.
Go.
All right, we made it back to the studio.
We're here.
We're going to talk about how we make this weather feast. What ingredients go into the winter that we're expecting? Lots of different elements at play, right?
The weather patterns, there's so much to look at, even globally, too.
Yeah, you got to think butterfly effect. What happens on one side of the globe ultimately does impact.
Because you're talking about the North Atlantic, you're talking about the Pacific, you're talking about ski areas.
Lake
We're
Erie
talking about
for
Lake
me.
Erie.
Yep.
I'm talking a little history in my professorial outfit. So let's talk about what happened last year. There's been a lot of variability recently. This is a look at that monster week of January last year.
Back-to-back lake effect snowstorms.
During the Bills playoff run, remember that? With the Steelers and then eventually Kansas.
That got delayed.
Right, and it was crazy. I had to navigate this storm driving into work.
We had like half of our seasonal snow is in a week.
It was like winter in a week.
But there's such variability. So we had that, the back-to-back lake effect snow events in January. But then when you look back at even, 2012, when we had a weak La Niña, we had barely any snow.
2011, 2012, the winter of my discontent, because it barely snowed. And that was in a weather pattern not too dissimilar to what we're seeing. So we have to include that.
Yes.
The latest 1 inch of snowfall in Buffalo in recorded history that
When
year.
was it? When was it?
In December.
Oh, it was 18th was the latest.
December 18th.
The latest snowfall ever.
Okay, here's
My kind of winter.
This is what I'm worried about, and I'm sure you're worried about as well. Way warmer than average September, warmer than average October. November is a little toasty, a little bit like 2022, which had a nice toasty November, but things went downhill. If you remember Christmas of 2022.
Well, no, before that, you had the Snowvember, the Snowvember Part 2.
That's right.
A storm that kind of gets forgotten because of the Christmas blizzard.
Right.
I got 80 inches of snow in Orchard Park, Hamburg, in like 3 days.
That was a tough start to winter.
Was that the Josh Allen of snow?
That was Josh Allen of snow.
The 77 inches?
And Squirrel on the tractor dug out Josh Allen.
That's right.
And then I got a hold of him because of a mutual friend.
Yeah.
And he came and dug me out. It was crazy.
Yeah, so we're looking at a lot of stuff,
Oh, yeah. Hey, Josh, hey. No, it didn't work out like that. Anyway, so let's talk about the genesis of all of this, which we think is going to be the Pacific Ocean in La Niña.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, so here, this is like there are a variety of climate variability. This is the ENSO, this is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. When it's in the positive phase, it is nicknamed La Niña, it is nicknamed El Nino. In the negative phase, it is nicknamed La Niña. Okay, so this is with the La Niña now. So cooler than average waters are projected for the equatorial Pacific. Okay, it's all about the strength. If you want to get real technical, it's the strength of the trade winds. And when the trade winds are weaker than average, the easterlies, then the warm water will bottle up, and it'll be a little bit warmer than average for the equatorial Pacific. But now trade winds will be a little bit. The easterlies will be a little bit stronger, more of an upwelling. If you're a Lake Ontario fisherman, you know about upwelling. So more nutrient-rich waters, better fishing anyway. But this La Niña, this cooler than average surface temperatures along the equatorial Pacific can actually affect the path of the jet stream across North America. And the jet stream is go ahead and advance the graphic. My clicker's not working. It took the weekend off. The jet stream is the steering mechanism for weather and weather systems across North America. And there are naturally occurring troughs and ridges that develop throughout week to week and from month to month. Typically, during a La Niña, we lean a little bit milder, a little bit warmer than average near the Great Lakes region or for Western New York. And go ahead and advance the next graphic too. We also lean a little bit wetter as well. So again, and for other areas in North America, La Niña and El Nino have more of a profound effect. But again, for Western New York, for the Great Lakes region, we lean a little bit warmer and a little bit wetter. Okay, so and when I say more precipitation events, it doesn't necessarily mean snow. This is one of those setups where we may have more mixed precipitation events, because we're talking about a setup where it's going to snow, but then it's gone the next day because we might lean a little bit warmer than average with the
We're kind of on that borderline between where it's really cold in the northern plains and the Midwest and Canada, but we're kind of on that edge where warmer temperatures come up from the south.
And another thing, it's expected to be a weaker La Niña. Right. So now that I've talked about it being a little bit warmer, a little bit wetter, it's going to be a little bit weaker than average. So what does that mean?
So that opens the door for other patterns we need to look at even further and more closely.
And absolutely, but what I want to do is take weak La Niñas and have a backward glance.
Yes.
Let's look backwards. Let's talk about this. So let's take a look at the history of snowfall here in Buffalo during weak La Niñas, okay? So in the last, going back, let's say to the 1950s, we've had basically 16 seasons that have featured a weak La Niña. And here they are, and the dates are down there as well. So the average is 94 inches, and if you look at this, you can see there's been a fair number of years that have had above normal snowfall, a couple of that have had normal snowfall, but then there's this year. We brought that up earlier. Oh my gosh, 2011, 2012. So if you use this alone, it doesn't give you a direct signal towards high snow or low snow. Just take, for instance, in the year 2000, we had 159 inches of snow, but just, not too much later than that, 11 years, we had the least amount of snow in Buffalo's history. So you can see there's a huge variance. So this can't be the only tool that we use It shows the variability, but it also shows there are more years than not that have average to above average snow if you took La Niña alone, which we're not. And Dan is going to have more on that in just a moment. Now, one of the things that we researched is that during weak La Niñas, oftentimes Decembers provide a bounty of snow. It's weird. Of all the snowy months, November through, let's say, March, Decembers tend to be big. And what I've done here is I've circled where Decembers have had healthy snows, what years have brought healthy snowfalls in the month of December. And most of them, from 1954, 1970, 83, 95, 2000, 2005, 2008, 2016, 2017, and then 2022, those weak La Niñas had big Decembers. Kind of interesting little correlation there. So that's why a part of our forecast thinking is there's a chance that despite the very mild start to November, likely to be a snowless one, at least through the first half of the month, we could make up for it quickly in the month of December. So that is something certainly to watch. So the next graphic I want to show you here is an interesting one. It's one that kind of breaks this all down, where you do see a big difference in the amount of years that you have normal snow, above normal, or below. So 3 years normal snow in that time range, 8 years above normal snow, and 5 years below normal. So there's a greater chance of those 16 seasons, using those as a guide, of having above or normal snowfall, which is kind of what we're thinking at this point. So that's kind of a breakdown of La Niña. That's in the Pacific. Now we have to discuss the other oceans, the Atlantic.
So one thing through many years of looking at especially La Niña years, because they are becoming a little bit more common here in Western New York.
And the weak ones sometimes too.
Yes, is that other teleconnections become way bigger. They have such a bigger influence.
And this one may have a bigger influence than the La Niña, maybe?
Yes, I think during this, and it's called the NAO, and so we're going to get right to it. The North Atlantic Oscillation. You might be asking, why are we looking to the east when we, most of our weather comes from the west? Well, think of it this way. Every storm that comes across the country, it needs an exit strategy. The NAO is the exit strategy for weather systems that are going to be moving across the country. So ultimately, we need to know what's going to happen. So let's go ahead and get right to it. Head on over to the Weather Center. And yes, we are traveling now out towards the Atlantic Ocean, where we're not looking at surface water temperatures. We are looking at surface pressure, sea level pressure. And what we have here is we have the Icelandic low, and these are semi-stationary areas of pressure. So we have the Icelandic low, we have the Azores high. And what we're looking at here is the strength of these pressure systems. Are they stronger or weaker than average? And that's key, because depending on that, that ultimately will tell us what's happening to that exit strategy for these weather systems. So when we have what's called a positive NAO, that's when these pressure systems are stronger than average. The Icelandic low, it is stronger. The Azores high, it is stronger than average. When that happens, we have that jet stream. This is the highway for storm systems across the country. We have the jet stream traveling. Now, though, it is juiced up. It's the throughway, if you will. It's the 90, where temperatures are, allowing all that juice just to fire up this jet stream. And again, these storm systems that prevent it from all that cold air sinking south, we get that more zonal flow in the storms where we get cold air that might try to briefly move in. It's just that. It briefly moves in and then it pulls back out. Typically, we see below average temperatures here in eastern Canada, and here in the east, we have above average temperatures. Now, what happens when we're looking at a negative NAO? That's when these pressure systems are weaker than average. They're not having that much of an impact on that flow, on the jet stream. What that allows, now notice, now we have that big amplitude here. Now that cold air is allowed to settle south. You go back to some of these years, even going back to 2022, where we had the November storm, the Christmas blizzard. That time period, we had a very much negative NAO. That produces a lot of blocking, and ultimately a lot of cold air is allowed to drain in to portions of the United States. And then notice what happens here in eastern Canada. We actually get above average temperatures. And again, during the La Niña years, the NAO has that much more of an impact. So what are we expecting the NAO to be in this upcoming season, and why we expect some of the numbers we are? Well, generally speaking, this year we expect the NAO to be more in a neutral phase. Ultimately, I think by the time, especially towards mid to late January and into February, we are expecting that positive phase. So less blocking, a lot more zonal flow, which ultimately will probably mean not a whole lot of winter weather for the winter weather enthusiasts. But if there's a time period where the NAO is going to be neutral to potentially negative, where we could see some of that blocking and some of that colder air, again, it's going to be early here in the season. So potentially December and maybe even until about early January. There's other feature I do want to mention, and that is Eurasian snow cover.
Eurasian snow cover.
Right? Why are we looking at Eurasian snow cover? What is Eurasian snow cover? Well, it is the snow cover here across northern Asia, pushing into northern Europe. We look at week 44. So this is the amount of snow that is adding up going into the winter season. The reason we look at this, well, this is Siberia right here. This is the heart of Siberia. This is where all the true Arctic and polar air masses originate. Why, you ask yourself? Well, the more snow has what we call a higher albedo. So the sun, with more snow, more sunlight actually gets reflected back out into outer space. So it almost turns into its own atmosphere where it actually gets colder, where more snowfall breeds colder air masses. The question is what's happening this year? So on average, we have just shy of 16 million square kilometers of snow cover. Well, this year, we're running a little bit above average. The caveat to that, it does not mean, yes, we do have the potential to build these cold air masses. The question, though, is that cold air going to be allowed to move into portions of course, the lower 48 and, if anything, here in the east? And that's where that NAO is going to have, I think, that bigger impact, because early in the season, it is potentially going to allow some of this cold air to move in. Later in the season, not quite as much so. So again, guys, just, a lot to go over there, a lot of science stuff.
So what you're telling me is, if I want to know how much snow is going to fall in Salamanca, I got to look at Siberia.
Is that crazy?
Okay.
Got it. Butterfly effect.
There you go.
Butterfly effect. What happens what happens in one part of the world, it ultimately does, whether it's along the equatorial Pacific, whether it's in the Atlantic or out in Siberia, all those ingredients.
Teleconnections.
Yes.
Right.
And it was so cool the other day. I love geeking out with you. We had all these charts all over the Weather Center, and we were looking at the correlation between weak La Niñas and the positive or negative NAO, and there is a strong correlation. So
Very strong.
that data that you were just showing, I mean, it's very interesting to see if this winter does line up as we've seen in past winters.
I do want to quickly mention now the NAO, that is very much an average, a very generalized average. Right. That index actually changes on a day-by-day basis. Okay. So when we're saying on average, negative or positive NAO, that is over a fairly long period of time, because within that, you can still get some blips. You can get where you can get a positive NAO over the course of a month, but you get a 4-day window where it does go negative, where it potentially gets
once you get those blocks in place, though, that's a game changer.
So this is a weather center and a geek center.
Establish that. And also, Dan, I got excited when you had the traffic analogy with the 90. We're just talking about
I knew you loved that one. I get it.
And then the Eurasian snow, you actually did that as your thesis in meteorology school.
Yes, so going way back.
And then mine in meteorology school, my thesis was on climate change. I mean, 15 years ago, I was looking already at data.
Before it was a thing.
Data of temperatures, snow, even locally I looked at that. And so that takes me now to what we're looking at in terms of Lake Erie ice cover and these record temperatures we're having for Lake Erie water. And we are also looking at, just Western New York winters. They are changing over time, and it's not even, you don't even have to really look at the data anymore. It's empirical data. We are experiencing it. So here's some data, though, as you can see. So record Lake Erie water temperatures, that's how we started October last year. We haven't hit 70 degrees in October, but we did last year. So we broke records, and it wasn't just one day. Several days, and we even increased to 71 on October 4th and on October 5th. Several degrees. I mean, you guys know with water, 3 degrees above the record, that's saying something. And then we did it again this year, once again, we had temperatures well above average with the Lake Erie water temperatures. And look at that, a new record. In fact, for October 1st, we hit 70 degrees. So you got another year where we're starting with very warm Lake Erie water temperatures, record breaking for the start of October. And then, Patrick, we were even talking about upper 50s in November, tying records for early November.
We
with
broke
the Lake
one
Erie,
today.
Yeah, for Lake Erie water temperatures. We're continuing to see that. So there is a trend that we're seeing. And it's not just in October or November. We're even seeing this in the coldest time of year, February. Mid-February, we are breaking record high daily water temperatures for Lake Erie.
Where's the ice?
Exactly. February 14th, this was early this year. So last winter, we hit a new daily record high for that Lake Erie water temperature at Buffalo, 36, and we had that open water. We are continuing to see a downward trend of Lake Erie ice cover. You've probably noticed it. The data is showing that, and it is accelerating. So look at this. These are some charts that I made from raw data of Lake Erie ice cover over time. And this is looking at 1982 to 2003. You'll notice the decreasing trend line. It is obvious over time. But when you look at the last 2 decades, look at that time, look at that trend line. It is accelerating. It is decreasing even more so. This is what we're seeing for the Lake Erie ice cover. We are seeing an increase in the water temperatures, the lowering ice. So this is something that we're continuing, guys, as I make my way back over to you. The trend, the changing climate for many spots, but including Western New York. We're seeing it in the data, and people, they're experiencing it too.
And one of the areas that is maybe seeing it the most is ski country, which lately has not, you know, we've had some big snows in the Buffalo Metro, the South Towns, but they've kind of missed ski country or snowmobiling areas, and a lot of those places are like, it's been a while since we've had a good winter.
The ski seasons seem to be, they're coming later, and they're shortening because of, you know, just the changes that we're seeing.
The snow's not hanging around, right?
Remember when the January thaw? Right. That was a thing. When growing up, right? Here in West New York,
we February thaw.
And it's a December thaw, and a second January thaw.
Right. If you think back to
we have many of them.
It's like, you know, it's the winter. Do you want to go skiing? Yeah, let's go skiing. Well, now you can't just go skiing on any day.
During the holidays.
You have to
Anymore.
Well, they can make snow, but the natural
it
snow.
Needs to be cold enough.
But that's the other thing. Well, Paul, he's going to talk about it. It hasn't been getting cold at night.
Yeah, sometimes they're not even capable of making it. Even with all their new technology, there's so many things that they can do. Take a look here. So we looked back at what's been happening over the last bunch of years, because that right there is indicative of what we could see coming. This right here is the 2023-2024 winter snowfall summary for Western New York. Obviously, when we're talking about going skiing, you might be talking about Ellicottville right here. Well, look, in this dark red spot right here, that is actually where we did receive the most snow. It was close to Alma. That's really not anywhere close to the ski resorts, especially in Ellicottville. If you're looking at these orange colors down here, look at the guide over on the side. We're talking about under 100 inches, and this has 117 for somewhere that is not the ski region. So again, times are changing right here in terms of, well, let's take a look at these images that Jen just showed a moment ago. This right here, you may remember that in February 2024, earlier this year, we had a rather significant storm that dropped some snow on us, but it was also one of the warmest Februaries on record. A third of the month, we had temperatures that were 10 degrees above average, 10 degrees or more above average.
It is all interesting. Bottom line, it's going to snow.
Yeah.
It's going to snow.
It's probably going to melt in between.
But there's so much variability. You know, we're probably going to see some big events. We're going to probably see some periods of warmth and very little snow. And there's some signs now that we're seeing that this warm trend that we've had in this fall may be extending deeper into the start of winter season.
A little long, but all it needs is just that break in the pattern, get some of that cold air, and then you get the lake effect snow events. And we do have at least one huge component. Lake Erie is sitting there ready with the fuel. Now we just need those other components.
Generally speaking, we've had this conversation. It seems that our winters as a whole are becoming less harsh from a grand scale. But the events
we're still getting
are getting harsher.
Yes.
The seasons are getting easier. The events are getting harsher.
Like the last
That's ultimately what I think we're transitioning into here.
And the last harsh winter was what, 14, 15?
14, 15.
When we had that record cold February.
Yep.
But since then, they've been You know, we've had some higher than normal snow totals, but there's just been so much melting. So we're calling for 80 to 90 inches of snowfall for the entire winter season. The average is 94 inches.
For our northern zones, not surprisingly, the lowest totals. Look for snow totals in the 50 to 60 inch range.
Moving on to the south towns, snowfall totals near the lake shore is expected to be in the 70 to 90 inch range. However, inland and into the hills, 120 to 140 inches.
And heading south into the southern tier, we are looking at a larger range from 80 to 180 inches with those higher amounts over ski country.